Hello and welcome to another video in the IELTS Learning Tips series. My name's Bernie Wall, and if you haven't met me before, then I'm an IELTS trainer and teacher, and I specialise in working with students who need band 7 and 8 in the IELTS. And that is actually quite a small proportion because on average the most common score to get in IELTS is around 6. So if you're looking for band 7 and 8, then you are in the minority. And the work I do helps students to just tweak their reading, writing, listening and speaking so that they can achieve these high bands. In this video today, I want to look at Task 1 Academic. Now, obviously, if you're taking general training, you may think, oh, this is not relevant to me. And in a way, you're right. But on the other hand, there may be one or two things in the video regarding language and organisation and planning that could be equally useful to the general training. So it may not be a waste of time to watch this video. But I will be focusing in this video on Task 1 Academic, and I'm going to show you 2 types of task. And then in the next video, I will be looking at general training. So as ever, I have a short presentation, which I'll share with you now. And then we can go through some of the important things to think about when you're doing Task 1 Academic. And the first is that the writing generally, both Task 1 and Task 2, is your opportunity to demonstrate your best language to the examiner. So the tasks you're given are usually quite straightforward. And the reason for that is that the idea of this exam is for you to take a fairly simple task and use it to demonstrate the best language that you have. And that means show off your vocabulary, how many sentence structures you can use, how well you can use linking words, how many complex sentences you can employ, etc. So don't forget, your job in this task and in both tasks is not to answer the question per se, it's to use your best language to give a good answer to the question. So language must always be in the forefront of your mind. So let's go on and have a look at a typical Task 1 data question. And you've probably come across this one. I can't remember where it comes from exactly, but it's a fairly typical one. So you can see it's a bar chart. You can see that the topic is research students in a UK university in 2009. And you can see that the chart itself has 2 bars for each subject that's mentioned. And 1 bar represents men and the other one represents women. And immediately we can see that there are more of the shaded bars. So clearly there are more men than women who are research students in these scientific subjects. We can also see that there's a shift between the first part of the chart and the second half of the chart, because in the second half the female students feature a little bit more. So one thing you're going to have to do here is to find lots of synonyms or different ways of expressing male and female students. So it's quite useful to think about that. So words like people, for example, you need, if you've got something on people or populations, you need to think about synonyms. Here we're going to need to think about different ways of talking about male and female students. Okay, so let's move on and just have a look at what we've discovered. So to remind you, there are 2 distinct bars shown, 1 for men, 1 for women. And overall, there appear to be more male students than female students. This is very clear and significant. This is the information that we see straight away, that there are more men than women. And this will form part of your overview. So your overview should not be something that you're looking for, that you're delving into the numbers for. It should be something that is obvious when you first look at the data. So the two things that we saw clearly were there were more male students than female, and secondly, that certain subjects seemed to be more popular with the female students than with the male. And there are also some subjects which were more popular overall, and that will form part of our paragraphs. But for the overview, it needs to be something that hits you straight away. Okay, so this is more of the detail. So fewer women in the first three subjects and more women in the latter second half of the chart. And then the other significant thing is that in the final chart, the final bar, which showed us veterinary science or veterinary medicine, there were actually more women than men. And this is the only subject where women outnumber men. So that's again something significant to say. So once we've had a look and worked out a few points that we can mention, then we need to start and create some sort of organized outline for our task. So in this one, we've got two options. We can either split the data into men versus women, or we can split the data into the subjects with a higher number of male students versus subjects with a higher number of female students. It doesn't really matter which you do. It's probably best to choose the one that seems the easiest or the most logical to you, because then you're going to be able to write it better. And then create a brief outline based on your decision here. So here we are, have a brief outline that I have created. So the introduction is fairly straightforward. You reword the question. Don't miss out the important information. So here, research students, UK university, and the year is important. And we also need to express that it's the figures for male and female students, and there are 6 science subjects. So think about getting all that really key information into 1 or 2. I generally do 2 sentences, but sometimes you can do it in 1. Okay. Then the overview, there are more male students in all subjects except for veterinary medicine. So that's probably enough for your overview. Don't go into any detail here. Don't start putting numbers in. It's just what it says, an overview, something that strikes you. Okay, then into the first paragraph. I've decided to split mine by subjects. So I'm looking at the first 3 subjects where there are far more male students. So physics, astronomy, and geology. And notice I'm going to put physics on its own and then astronomy and geology together, because they have the same number of male students and the difference in the female students is not so huge. And I've started to put in a few words, so I'm probably going to use respectfully here. And I'm going to use highest and lowest. So while you're doing this little outline, think also of some of the vocabulary that you might want to use. Okay, and then in my second paragraph, I'm looking at the second half of the chart where the numbers were closer. And I've done these separately. So I've dealt with biology because the difference in numbers is a little bit closer. And in medicine, they're almost the same. And then it flips for veterinary medicine, and we can see that there are more women than men. So we can deal with that, put in the numbers, and then give a little bit more detail on what's happening and join all our sentences together. You don't need a conclusion, but if you think you haven't got enough words, then you can always put in a concluding sentence, which either summarizes or speculates on why this may be the case. So in this case, probably one wouldn't speculate, but you might do some sort of summarizing sentence. But it's always useful to think about doing that if you're not sure you have enough words. Okay, so then we expand the outline into our task. And as we do that, there are things that you really need to keep in mind. Sentence structures, as wide a variety as possible. Number expression. Think about different ways. The more different ways you can express your numbers, the better. So sometimes with words like both, each, respectfully, sometimes with prepositions like at, sometimes in brackets at after the end of the sentence. There are lots of different ways of doing it, but you need to use many different ways so that it makes your writing more interesting. Think about vocabulary. So here I already mentioned about synonyms for gender, for male and female. So that sort of thing is important. So think about different ways that you can use vocabulary and try not to repeat the same words or the same sentence structure too much. Grammar, if you make grammar mistakes, then they will pull your score right down. So be mindful of the grammar. Cohesion obviously is important, and that's cohesion between your paragraphs, but also cohesion between your sentences. They must be related to one another. You have to have complex sentences for band 7 and 8. If you don't, then you won't get band 7 and 8. So it's critical that you think about this. And think about using nouns and more nouns than verbs, because this enables you to use adjectives and quantifiers and modifiers, and that all helps you to demonstrate more vocabulary. And obviously think about linking words. This is particularly important for cohesion, and it's also important for contrasting or comparing the information that you're writing about. Okay. So just before we move on to this map, I want to say that doing this little outline and plan helps you to focus more on the language when you're doing the actual writing. And it's quite important that you do that, because that long list that I've just shown you of all the things you need to bear in mind is really what will make or break your essay. So it's not so much about the topic, the data, the picture, the map, whatever. It's about how you interpret it and the language that you use to interpret it. So it's quite critical that your focus when you're writing is on language and less on the data itself. That's why we do a little outline, so that we've got the data sorted and then we can go straight to the writing and focus on language. Okay, so here's a map. We can see quite a big difference. In the first map, it's quite empty. There are just a couple of plantations of palm trees. It looks like a desert island, and it's got a small beach area to the left of the picture. When we look at the development afterwards, we can see it's been quite significant. So we've got lots of these little accommodation blocks, huts, I think they are. There's a reception area and a restaurant. So clearly it attracts a lot of people now that it has become a resort. The other features are a swimming area off the beach, which wasn't there before. And there is also a pier and some sailing activity which has been introduced. And then finally, as we see in the legend here, there are some footpaths and some vehicle tracks. So there's quite a lot to describe about the development of this desert island. So let's go on and see what's striking. So just to summarize what we've just said, those are the new features. The only things the same are the size, the beach, and those two plantations of palm trees. Okay, the development is located towards one side of the island, as towards the left on our picture. And it's clear that a very popular resort has been created from this hitherto desert island. So, as before, we look at all the features and then we create an outline. So here we talk about the change very briefly. Then we talk about, in the overview, what's significant. So at some point, we don't know when, it has changed from a very deserted place to a very popular place. And then here, I've decided to put the original features and then show how that's changed. So in the first paragraph, I'm going to concentrate on the first map and then the things that have been added in that area. So the beach and the swimming, the accommodation, the restaurant and the reception. And then in the second, I'm going to talk more about the tracks and about the boating and the pier. And there's some words here that you might not know, like dinghies, which are small sailing boats. And I mentioned the word plantation. It's here, plantation for small collections of trees. Okay, so again, a simple outline. This is probably a little bit more detailed than you might need in the exam situation, but it is good to note down the things that you're going to include in each paragraph, because it helps you write much more quickly and more accurately, and it helps you focus on the vocabulary and language. So then we write the task. So we need to bear in mind all the things I mentioned before about cohesion, about language, about structures. When you're doing a map, you need to concentrate a little bit more on tenses than you do in, say, the data, because you might be describing past to present or present to future. In this particular map, we don't really know when these happened, but clearly it's past to sometime now or before now. But in some of them where you've got specific dates, you do need to take note of tenses. Then expand all your notes in the outline into full sentences. Think about specialist vocabulary. I mentioned before dinghies, plantations. Location is important with the map. Sometimes you'll be given a compass. If you are not given a compass, then use right, left, top, bottom, far, side, near side, etc. However you want to express it. But it's good to give these location pointers. Keep to the word count. Don't go too far over. I would say around 180 is optimum. If it's low, then you know you'll get penalized. So it's got to be at least 150. But I would be looking at 180, maybe 190 if there's a lot of information. And as I mentioned before, if you feel you're under length, then just do a summarizing sentence at the end. And try to check your work. I know this is not always possible, but to be honest, if you plan it well, then you should be able to write more quickly, and then you will have 2-3 minutes to go back and check. And that's what you should be aiming at. You should be aiming at trying to do the planning, the writing and the checking in 20 minutes maximum. And a lot of my students that I work with can actually do the task 1 in 15 minutes, which gives them a little bit more time for their task 2. And it's better that way than not having enough for task 2. Okay, so I hope that helps a little bit with your preparation for task 1. I have prepared 2 models for these 2 tasks, and you'll find those on the free resources page on my website, IELTSlearningtips.com. So I'll just stop sharing that. So I hope that's helpful. As I mentioned earlier, I will be looking at task 1 general training next week, and we'll be looking at a couple of the letters. So there are free resources on my website, IELTSlearningtips.com, and if you need any advice or want to ask any questions, you can post them here, or you can go to my website, and there is an opportunity to have a call with me to discuss your IELTS and any of the challenges that you're facing. So I hope to see you on the next video, and thank you for watching. Bye-bye.